Karoline Leavitt's presence on Capitol Hill was meant to signal poise and political control, especially as scrutiny mounted around Donald Trump's growing list of legal entanglements. Scheduled to speak briefly with the press outside a committee hearing room, Leavitt had prepared her talking points, focusing on the usual themes: witch hunt, political persecution, and media bias. But what was supposed to be a routine moment in front of the cameras turned into something far more telling about her readiness and willingness to face hard questions. As she stepped out into the hallway, her demeanor was composed. A few journalists had already gathered with recorders out, questions on standby. Everyone expected her to repeat the same lines she had delivered during recent interviews defending Trump, who was under fire once again this time for reports linking a close circle of allies to a controversial pardon for donations arrangement during his final days in office. Although Trump himself hadn't issued a public response to the new claims, the chatter was everywhere, and Leavitt, a former spokesperson for him, was among the few who had taken a strong public stance, dismissing the allegations outright. It was precisely that context that set the stage for what happened next. Walking down the hall from a nearby committee room, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett spotted Leavitt just as she stepped in front of the press. Crockett, never one to hold back when truth is on the line, slowed her pace and then walked directly toward the cameras, not for attention, but for accountability. Karoline, she said evenly, stopping just to the side of the press circle. Before you repeat your script, are you going to say something real about Trump's pardon scandal? Or are you just going to keep pretending it never happened? Leavitt turned to Crockett, eyes narrowing slightly. She offered a tight-lipped smile, clearly caught off guard. There was a small pause as cameras and smartphones tilted to catch both women in the same frame. I'm not here for theatrics, Leavitt responded. I'm here to talk policy and stand against these ridiculous accusations. But Crockett stood her ground. You were Trump's voice. People want to know if you're standing behind him, even as his associates are being linked to selling presidential pardons. That's not ridiculous, that's corruption. What's your take now? Leavitt glanced at the reporters, who were now inching forward, microphones extended and waiting. The moment was tense, not loud or chaotic, but charged. It was the kind of silence where the absence of an answer says more than words. Without addressing the core of the question, Leavitt turned her back to the mics. Her aide leaned in, whispered something, and within seconds, she was walking away. No statement, no response, no attempt to clarify. The reporters followed briefly, calling her name, but she picked up speed and exited the hallway entirely, disappearing behind a secure office door where cameras weren't allowed to follow. It didn't take long for the footage to surface online. Within minutes, the clip of Crockett confronting Leavitt walking away was making the rounds on political Twitter and YouTube. The hashtags began to trend. #Leavitt runs, #Crockett confronts, and #Trump scandal. Conservative commentators scrambled to frame it as a setup or ambush, while others pointed to the fact that Leavitt had a clear opportunity to respond. Dan chose not to. The situation raised questions about Leavitt's political instincts under pressure. For someone who had defended Trump publicly across multiple platforms, her retreat when pressed on the substance of one of the most damning allegations signaled more than discomforted, hinted at strategic avoidance. Critics argued that if she truly believed the allegations were false or politically motivated, she could have stood firm and said so. Instead, she opted out entirely. The irony wasn't lost on observers. Someone who built her political identity around defending Trump's truth had suddenly gone silent when asked to speak plainly in a moment that counted. Whether it was fear of saying the wrong thing or an admission that there was no good answer, her withdrawal said enough. Even longtime allies of Trump behind closed doors reportedly acknowledged that the optics of the moment were bad, especially in contrast to Crockett, who faced the press with no script and no hesitation. In a political climate where image, response, and accountability matter more than ever, the fact that Leavitt ran from the press instead of facing questions only intensified the scrutiny, just on her, but on anyone still choosing to defend Trump without confronting the consequences of his actions. Jasmine Crockett has never been one to mince words, especially when truth is on the line. Her approach isn't built on theatrics or forced outrage. It's grounded in a sharp legal mind and a sense of duty to hold people accountable, particularly those who operate from positions of influence without consequence. So, when she spotted Karoline Leavitt heading toward a group of reporters on Capitol Hill, Crockett knew the moment wasn't about scoring political points. It was about getting answers. Donald Trump's alleged pardon for donations scandal had exploded across media outlets just days earlier. Reports claimed that during the final chaotic months of his presidency, individuals with deep pockets had been quietly granted pardons or legal reprieves after significant financial contributions. The accusations weren't unsubstantiated, were tied to communications, donation records, and anonymous testimonies from former staffers. Although Trump dismissed the allegations as another witch hunt, the timing and details felt all too familiar. Karoline Leavitt, a former spokesperson for Trump and now a conservative political figure in her own right, had been quick to denounce the reports. She appeared on conservative news programs, calling the story manufactured outrage and labeling those pursuing it as deep state operatives. But what stood out was her refusal to engage with the actual content of the claims. She didn't acknowledge the donors involved, the timeline, or the troubling implication that presidential power had been commodified. That's what Jasmine Crockett couldn't overlook. As Leavitt approached the press, prepared to give a brief statement, Crockett moved in not with hostility, but with surgical focus. You've said this is all made up, Crockett began, her tone calm but unyielding. But let me ask you directly, if Trump's team was offering pardons in exchange for money, are you still standing by that and calling it fake news? The reporters fell silent. Everyone had been prepared to hear Leavitt give her usual lines. No one expected a sitting congresswoman to confront her in real time with such directness. Leavitt froze for a moment, clearly not expecting Crockett to engage in public. Leavitt tried to pivot. Jasmine, I think you're choosing to believe political fiction instead of focusing on what the American people care about. But Crockett didn't allow the deflection to stand. This isn't fiction. There are names, there's timing, and there's money. You were his spokesperson. You had access. You know how the messaging worked. So if this happened, and a lot of people believe it did, what does it say that you're still calling it fiction? The challenge wasn't just about defending Trump. It was about acknowledging whether ethics still mattered to those who surrounded him. Crockett's point wasn't just rhetorical. It was a reflection of growing frustration in Congress with those who continued to sidestep serious allegations under the guise of partisanship. Leavitt visibly tightened her jaw. I'm not here to relitigate the past, she said. That's not the past, Crockett replied quickly. This is about accountability now. You defended a man who may have sold presidential pardons. The public deserves to know if you're defending that. The tension was real, but it wasn't performative. Crockett's confrontation put the issue into stark clarity. How far would those who once stood by Trump go to distance themselves from his most troubling decisions? Would they simply pretend nothing happened? Leavitt looked to her aide, then stepped back without answering further. Reporters surged forward asking follow-ups, but she refused to engage. Moments later, she was gone, leaving only a few muffled words from her staffer claiming she had. Another engagement, the significance of the exchange, wasn't lost on the political world. Within hours, it was being dissected on cable news and shared across social media. Commentators pointed out that Crockett didn't rely on slogans or soundbites. She simply asked pointed, factual questions that Leavitt could have addressed, but didn't. Her refusal to even acknowledge the core issue, the potential abuse of presidential power, spoke volumes. Meanwhile, Crockett's actions drew praise from both sides of the aisle, who felt it was time someone confronted Trump loyalists about their uncritical loyalty. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made it about herself. She just wanted to know whether someone who once served as Trump's spokesperson could still, in good faith, defend something as serious as pardons being traded for cash. The question hangs heavier now, because for all the loyalty Leavitt once showed Trump, the silence she chose in that moment may say even more about the growing discomfort surrounding the scandals that still follow him. Karoline Leavitt's decision to walk away without answering questions might have seemed like a minor moment in the noise of Capitol Hill, but it rapidly became something much larger, a flashpoint of attention, criticism, and speculation that stretched far beyond Washington. The incident took less than 2 minutes, but within hours, it was the top trending clip on several political media accounts, and by evening, it had been picked up by major news outlets. The video didn't need editing or commentary to go viral. The raw footage spoke for itself. Jasmine Crockett calmly asked a direct question about Donald Trump's alleged involvement in a pardon for donation scheme, and Karoline Leavitt, of responding, turned away and walked off. Asterisk, it wasn't just the optics of her retreat that triggered the response. It was the context. In a moment where trust in political figures is already thin and accountability often feels optional, seeing a prominent Trump-aligned figure go silent when confronted raised uncomfortable questions about integrity, about strategy, and about fear. Leavitt had built much of her public persona around being unapologetic in defending Trump. She championed his rhetoric, amplified his grievances, and mocked those who challenged him. Her social media feed was a steady stream of pro-Trump messaging targeting what she called the radical left and fake news media. Asterisk, but this was different. The accusations surrounding Trump's final days in office weren't about policy disagreements or partisan bias. They were about power, money, and the possible sale of presidential clemency. Reports indicated that wealthy individuals were allegedly able to secure pardons after making large donations to Trump's political organizations or intermediaries. While Trump denied wrongdoing and insisted everything was above board, the public still hadn't received a clear explanation. Leavitt, who had served as one of his most visible mouthpieces, was now being asked whether she still stood by him. Even as these troubling details surfaced, asterisk, Jasmine Crockett's confrontation was not staged or exaggerated. She asked questions, grounded in documented allegations, ones that demanded a serious response. And when Leavitt chose not to answer when she physically left the space where those questions were being asked, it gave the impression that she either didn't know how to respond or knew that any answer might expose vulnerabilities for her. Or for Trump. Asterisk, the media didn't miss it. Every angle of the walk-off was dissected. Her facial expression, the pause before turning, the whispered word from her aide, and the silence that followed. It wasn't framed as a dramatic collapse or a viral gotcha moment. Instead, it was portrayed as something more subtle and potentially more damaging, a failure to face scrutiny in the same way she had once delivered it. Asterisk, social media lit up with commentary. Some called it cowardice. Others labeled it smart damage, control. But even among Trump supporters, there was a shift in tone. Conservative influencers who had previously boosted Leavitt's rise began asking why she didn't take on the media lies, as they put it, if she had nothing to hide. The pardon allegations were indeed false. Why not say so on the record? The silence left a vacuum. And in politics, a vacuum never stays empty for long. Asterisk, cable news panels ran loops of the exchange all evening. Analysts pointed out that while Crockett had nothing to gain politically by confronting Leavitt, she had done something many in Congress hadn't demanded a straight answer. And Leavitt's silence, they argued, reflected how hard it's become for Trump allies to defend him without running into contradictions, ethical concerns, or outright scandal. Asterisk, the contrast between the two women was hard to ignore. Crockett stood firmly, calmly questioning a peer on matters of public integrity. Leavitt, known for her confident media appearances and combative style, chose to disappear from the moment entirely. That contrast wasn't lost on voters either. The incident quickly became a litmus test for how political figures handle accountability in real time. It wasn't about winning an argument. It was about who shows up when the stakes are high. Asterisk, in the end. What made the moment resonate so strongly wasn't just Leavitt's silence. It was the fact that someone had finally asked her the kind of questions she couldn't walk away from without consequence. Her physical exit from the press area may have avoided the confrontation in the moment, but the long-term impact of that choice is still unfolding as more people ask, what else trumps? Defenders are unwilling to answer. The confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Karoline Leavitt wasn't just a clash of personalities or party lines. It was a reflection of the growing pressure surrounding Donald Trump's legal troubles and the deepening cracks among those tasked with defending him. With every new revelation connected to his presidency, the room for blind loyalty continues to shrink, especially for political figures who once built their careers off proximity to his power. Leavitt, a rising conservative voice and former spokesperson for Trump, has often taken center stage in defending his most controversial decisions. But the moment she was publicly challenged on a serious scandal allegations of pardons being granted in exchange for political donations, her silence spoke louder than any press release. As Trump faces investigations and indictments across multiple fronts, his allies are finding it increasingly difficult to offer the kind of unconditional support that once came so easily. The era of sweeping statements about witch hunts and deep state conspiracies is no longer enough to shield those in his circle from real-time accountability. Crockett's decision to press Leavitt on the matter was more than just a tactical move. It was part of a broader effort by lawmakers, particularly those on the House Oversight and Judiciary Committees, to demand clarity and responsibility from anyone who publicly aligns themselves with the former president. The allegations regarding pardons for donations weren't vague. They were tied to specific names, financial records, and insider reports suggesting that Trump's inner circle may have facilitated deals that essentially monetized presidential power. For someone like Leavitt, who had been part of Trump's communication apparatus, the expectation was clear: either disavow the wrongdoing or continue defending it under scrutiny. There was no middle ground, and Crockett made sure of that when she directly asked Leavitt whether she stood by the man even amid mounting evidence of transactional justice under his leadership. This shift where Trump's defenders are no longer insulated from the consequences of his controversies has created visible discomfort in Republican ranks. Even among staunch Trump allies, there is a hesitation that wasn't present in earlier years. The pardon scandal is particularly difficult to spin because it doesn't rely on vague accusations. It deals with the concrete abuse of a constitutional power, one that was supposed to serve justice, not personal or political gain. And for someone like Crockett, who has a background in law and civil rights, this kind of alleged corruption strikes at the very foundation of public service. When Leavitt walked away from the press after being confronted, the political symbolism was immediate. Here was a figure who had spent months and, in some cases, years, attacking Democrats and the media for dodging facts and refusing transparency, now visibly retreating when asked a direct question. For many watching, it exposed a fragile underbelly of the pro-Trump coalition. They can repeat the slogans, but when confronted with detailed, uncomfortable truths, they often have little to say. Crockett's role in this moment also highlighted a broader dynamic at play. She wasn't grandstanding or performing. She was asking a legitimate question, rooted in public interest. If presidential pardons were influenced by money, it undermines the core of democratic accountability. And if someone who once represented Trump to the public can't even comment on the possibility, what does that suggest about the nature of the administration she helped promote? This moment underscored a transition point in American politics. The scandals surrounding Trump are no longer confined to the man himself. They're rippling outward, forcing those who stood beside him to confront their own complicity or detachment. The confrontation made clear that politicians can no longer speak for Trump without also answering for him. That is the real impact of what happened between Crockett and Leavitt. It wasn't just about a single scandal or a short hallway exchange. It was about the cost of affiliation with a political figure whose legacy is increasingly defined by legal jeopardy, ethical ambiguity, and an ever-growing list of unanswered questions. The pressure is building, and it's not just coming from the left. Journalists, independents, and even moderate conservatives are beginning to ask tougher questions. And those questions are no longer aimed solely at Trump. They're directed at every person who helped create, enable, or justify the decisions made under his leadership. In that light, Leavitt's silence was more than personal discomfort. It was a symptom of a larger issue, the unsustainable loyalty required to remain aligned with a figure whose controversies show no signs of fading. The confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Karoline Leavitt, brief as it was, offered a window into the current state of American political discourse, especially the tension between loyalty and accountability. It wasn't a dramatic spectacle or a choreographed take. It was a plain, public moment that exposed a fundamental dilemma for those who have built their careers defending Donald Trump. The questions are getting harder. The scandals are piling up, and silence or evasion is no longer a sustainable strategy. Asterisk, Karoline Leavitt's decision to walk away rather than address Crockett's questions was telling not just about her, but about a broader pattern among Trump's political allies. The old playbook of dismissing everything as fake news or partisan smear is wearing thin. The allegations surrounding the sale of presidential pardons are serious, specific, and deeply consequential. They don't just point to personal misconduct. They call into question the integrity of the office of the presidency itself. Defenders like Leavitt are increasingly caught in a trap of their own making. Either they stay loyal and sidestep uncomfortable facts, or they risk alienating the very base that propelled them into relevance. Asterisk Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, didn't seek out the spotlight. She demanded clarity. Her calm, factual approach in the confrontation set a tone for what accountability should look like in real time. She wasn't grandstanding or chasing headlines. She simply asked questions that many Americans wanted answered. And when Leavitt had no answers, it spoke volumes. That silence wasn't just a missed media opportunity, it was a moment of reckoning. Captured on camera, asterisk, the ripple effect of that moment is still unfolding. Online discourse has already magnified the incident, and the video is likely to become a recurring clip whenever questions about Trump's legacy and the loyalty of his allies come up again. But beyond the viral attention, there's something more lasting at play here. The political space once occupied by Trump's defenders is becoming increasingly unstable. They are being forced to answer not just for his words, but for his actions and for the implications of those actions on democratic norms, justice, and public trust. Asterisk, ultimately, this incident serves as a reminder that silence in the face of serious allegations isn't neutrality, it's a choice. And in politics, every choice has consequences. As more figures like Leavitt find themselves under pressure, the question becomes whether they will continue to dodge, deflect, or retreat, or whether they'll finally begin to engage with the full weight of the facts they've long tried to ignore. If they don't, they may find the public and even their own colleagues less willing to look the other way. The standard is shifting, and the era of unchecked loyalty may finally be giving way to a demand for real accountability.